Hey everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations. And we are going to be diving deep into this video and we're going to be exploring this new moon in Scorpio. My gosh, there is a lot of transformational potential that is sort of on the peripherals of our conscious. There is it's just so fertile at the moment when it comes to the opportunity and the potential for deep emotional breakthroughs, for the potential to have liberation from our past patterns of emotional dynamics to be broken through, and for there to be an opportunity to really have agency to move beyond the shackles of these past emotional memories that we've associated with, that we've been bound to, and that do actually take up space within our cognition, right? We're so limited when we're possessed by the ghosts of our past. And this energy right now, this new moon in Scorpio, really does point to a profound opportunity to change and create and experience metamorphosis, right? When it comes to these emotional patterns that hold us back. So I want to dive into that with you today. So I think that I'll just start off by talking about what I have in plan and in store for us today. Okay, so this is going to be a long video, okay, and it's going to have quite a lot of information in it, a lot to process, a lot to take in. So I do encourage you to take your time with this video, let it digest, give yourself space to be present with what it is that I'm sharing, because as I said, there's going to be a lot of insight, a lot of information that will come through that if you're allowing it to be soaked up, you can really experience the clarity and understanding that I wish to impart, not only for me as I'm talking about it, but also for you that's watching this video as well, okay? So really do take the time to come back to it consistently, listen to it in small chunks if that's what you need, but definitely give yourself the opportunity to allow this entire immersive experience to be digested by yourself, okay? One of the reasons why I'm really excited to actually do this video is because there's so many teaching opportunities in terms of astrology, but also so many opportunities to really ground, the power of understanding astrology and using it as a tool for guidance, as a tool for being able to deepen your relationship to your own life story, and to even awaken what may be dormant or latent, or that wants to be experienced and expressed in your consciousness, right? So that is also something that I'm bringing to this conversation today. Really, I've sat with this content, I've really reflected on it, and I hope that today I'm going to be able to anchor in, ground, bring into the physical the emotional experience and sensations that comes along with the insights that I've been receiving and reflecting upon with this energy at the moment. Okay, now that that has been said, I've got my little map over here to help me kind of create a flow. So the first place that I want to start off with is that, so Saturn's gone direct, as you know, okay? If you haven't watched that video, I encourage you to do that, right? I talk about it in terms of what is the potential. So Saturn's gone direct, and that is a big deal, again, because for the next 7 months, this is where our emotional work is going to appear. This is where it's going to manifest for ourselves, right? So wherever Saturn is in your chart, pay close attention to what is emerging, what is developing, what is wanting to grow and take up space in that area, right? What is wanting to take up space in that area. So Saturn going direct is important, and you will benefit greatly from using and understanding astrology as well as where Saturn sits in your chart, which is one of the reasons why you're sitting and watching this video. Okay, So Saturn's gone direct, and the reason why I value that is because, and I've said this in previous videos, the energy of this moment, of this time, right, over the last couple of weeks, will be contained in the emotional development that Saturn is going to be revealing to us and what we are going to go on. Okay, so if you take a look at the transits that have been taking place surrounding Saturn going direct, it gives us insight into how we can orientate, right? How we can sort of begin to position our perception so that we can digest and recognize the patterns that are emerging in our consciousness, right? Emerging within your life, and then be able to interact with them and respond to them like, okay, this is where the development is going on for you and for me. And so for me, Saturn is transiting my second house of the astrology chart, and I can feel that emotional development taking place for me already, right? I'm starting to notice that second house energy really coming through. And I'd even go as far as to say that one of the main reasons why this video is being created is come from the Saturn moving in my second house and sort of doing the things that it's doing for me over there, the inspiration, as it were. Okay. So what is that energy, right? What is the energy that is present for us? What is the energy that is salient for us? What is the energy that is here for us to embrace, to integrate, to understand, to emotionally connect to? What is that energy? So I'm going to try and answer that today for us. So I think what we should do is let's go and look at the chart so that you can see the terrain. And when we look at the chart, I've highlighted 3 key points that I'm going to be specifically talking to. Okay, so let's go and look at the chart right now. Here's the chart of the new moon. And right at the top there, you can see that there's a sort of pink reddish star. And that's where you've got the sun, the moon conjunction 20 degrees. You've got Mars sitting there at 22. And then Mercury has already passed that energy, right? So that one area, I'm going to be talking about it as Scorpio. Okay, I'm going to be talking about it through the lens of where the awakening of our depth is taking place. All right, so I'm going to be exploring that with us. That's where the new moon is, right? 20 degrees Scorpio. Then I'm also going to be talking about the opposition that is happening with Uranus and Jupiter, primarily Uranus in this case. So that's significant, right? That opposition between the sun and moon and Mars and Uranus is very significant. And in the previous videos, I talked about the importance of this Mars-Uranus and what it represents, right? Turbulence ahead. And what I started to say today was that the planetary systems, the energies that are surrounding Saturn direct are important, and what are they? So leading up to this full moon, this new moon, pardon me, we've had those turbulent emotional eruptions. Okay, so that's a key, right? What has been emotionally flooding into your consciousness? What has been emotionally emerging into your awareness that you've started to notice as a pattern, right, of disempowerment, right? That's the first key. What are these patterns that are emerging? And each of us has a unique sort of connection to that, right? So that's one. And this new moon reflects the sort of pinnacle point, right? The top of the mountain of this emotional energy that has been swelling, right? Getting larger, becoming more salient, becoming more intense, right? This energy has been growing up until this point, and this new moon reflects the kind of like highlight, like the major point, like this is what it's at, okay? So it's very significant in the sense that the energy has been growing and growing, and the sensitivity to these dynamics within our consciousness have been growing, and now we've reached a kind of peak experience, right? This is the swelling point of this Uranus-Mars opposition, okay? And if you look further down at the chart, you'll see that I've marked a black circle with Saturn there in Pisces, okay? And Saturn is actually making a trine, sorry, not Saturn, pardon me, Neptune is actually making a trine to Scorpio and the new moon there. So that's also really important, and I'll be touching on what that means. Saturn and Neptune are in this astrology chart over here, they're kind of telling us and showing us what the way forward is, right? A part of the way forward through this energy is deeply held in the natural trine between Neptune and this new moon. Okay, so we've got the Taurus archetype with Uranus. That's the sun energy over there, and that is to preserve and to keep things hidden. Okay, so keeping things hidden as an act of self-preservation or preservation. Okay, so that's one element I'm going to be talking about. The other element is the Scorpio energy. This has a lot to do with the violations, the recognition of where vulnerability exists within us, and how we've experienced the loss of our chastity, right? When we come into the world, there are going to be experiences, betrayals, abandonments, losses that we will need to go through and endure. And a lot of the times, our natural response to these intense experiences of vulnerability is to create a shield, right? So I'm going to be talking about where the parts of these violations have occurred in our psyche, in our consciousness, and how we've needed to develop acts of preservation, right, to protect this vulnerability, right? So we'll shield it. And then the Saturn trine, or the Saturn in Pisces, I'm going to be talking about it in the terms of like the end of times, right? What happens to our consciousness? What happens to our lives when we go through stages of culmination, when societies culminate and come to the end of their cycle? What happens in our consciousness when this takes place? And so that's the chart, that's the symmetry. And what I want to be doing here again is breaking this down for us, right? Really going deep into these archetypal landscapes so that we can ultimately come to the message that is held in this chart over here, and also what I mean when I say that there is such powerful potential for transformation and for us to release ourselves from the bondage of these prior memories that possess our consciousness and our emotions. And we live in the echoing of these distortions. And when we live in these echoings, it manifests and reflects intense lack of love, of wholeness, of integration, right? We feel disconnected and isolated in this process, and it brings up sides of ourselves that are less capable of experiencing true humanity, right? And you can see this all across the board within our collective field at the moment, but also in terms of just the way that we may feel when we are interacting with these hurt parts of ourselves. So that's the chart, that's the landscape, that's where I'm going to be drawing my inspiration from. And so I'm going to start off by talking about the Taurus archetype. Okay, so the Taurus archetype. So if you follow my work, you will know that I associate, as well as evolutionary astrology associates the Taurus archetype, right? The principle, the like the patterning of Taurus, right? When you point to the patterning of Taurus, in reality, what you're looking at is the instinct for survival. Within our genetics, within the genetics of plants, of animals, of trees, etc., everything that is living needs to have some form of genetic coding that creates an instinct to preserve. And so it reflects itself as a need, right? We have needs. We can't live underwater unless we build a shelter that preserves oxygen for us, and that we can then use oxygen to be able to breathe. Because the principle of survival for us when it comes to living in this world is that we require oxygen for our organism to exist. That's why you can't go out into space and just be like, yeah, I'm cool. We can't. We don't survive. That's why if you go climb mountains, for instance, like really, really high mountains, Mount Everest, Kilimanjaro, etc., you need oxygen masks the further up you go, because we require it here in this kind of biosphere. So if you think about it and you feel into the Taurus archetype, right, there's a preservation instinct within us. And this is a very strong and it's necessary. And this instinct, when it emerges into our consciousness in terms of our psychological and emotional psychology, what it shows up as is self-preservation, right? We guide our choices from this state of self-preservation or preservation. And this is an important thing to understand, because when you have Uranus moving through Taurus, when you have Jupiter moving through Taurus, what becomes salient for us, right? What becomes real, what we start to notice in the most immediate parts of our reality, is that this sensitivity to how are we going to survive, right? How am I going to survive? What values do I need to build around this instinct of preservation that allows me to live? Okay, so think about it in terms of what is changing for you, right, within your own life, in terms of what values you may start to notice that are shifting internally for you as you interact with and respond to the impressions of the external world. Yeah. So you think about that, right? Think about the types of pressures that are present with us, right, on the sort of edges of our consciousness, and the way that the world is working at the moment. It's we respond to these pressures based on what we consider to be valuable and what is not valuable anymore, and also what is preserving. And the landscape for what this answer is it's completely diverse, because one person may have this value as an act of self-preservation, like this is a healthy routine for me. Somebody else will recognize an act of self-preservation as the importance of developing a skill to improve their competency, so they can get a job that allows them to improve, say for instance, the amount of energy that they can receive in exchange for their skills, right? This is what you now take within yourself. What is shifting in your current field, energetic field, that has this instinct of self-preservation or preservation. Okay, so that's one thing, right? This preservation mechanism. And you can think about Uranus and Jupiter there as a planet, right? It's Uranus is decentralizing this aspect of our awareness, and it's asking us to go beyond what we've currently defined as the values in a society or the values internally within ourselves. Okay. Now, when the act of self-preservation is threatened, right? When we are in states of our survival is threatened, our instinct for self-preservation is threatened, the ego responds to this through repressing it or hiding it or shaming it, right? Or putting it aside. And what we do is we compartmentalize and we split off and we fragment parts of our energy, so that we can then survive or preserve ourselves. Now, growing up as a child, well, growing up not as an adult, right? But growing up as a child, and growing up, when we map reality, we are going to interact with and we're going to experience situations, circumstances, and scenarios that will elicit a feeling of threat. And what we'll then start to do is we'll start to form maps of reality around these patterns of threat, and we'll say, oh, okay, that's going to harm me, this is dangerous, this is not good. And so therefore what we do is we compartmentalize, we break apart a part of our identity, right, our sense of interaction with the world, and we put it aside, right, we bury it actually. And this is something that we all carry within ourselves. Uranus moving through Taurus at the moment is creating a decentralization of these emotional patterns that we once perceived or recognized or defined as negative or bad or shameful. Okay, so whether that be induced by the collective that says, oh, you can't do this anymore, And so therefore, if 30 people say you can't do this anymore, you're more likely to act in preservation, because you're more likely to live successfully in a group of people versus just one. Especially in our more sort of like earlier days of our evolution, where we needed more people to be able to survive. So, and it still is existing today. So preservation, active self-preservation, when we're growing up, we develop these habits, these patterns, these parts of ourselves that we will often hide for fear of rejection, for fear of humiliation, or for fear of being shamed, and we'll put it aside, right? These parts of ourselves are good in one way, but we can also reject these parts of ourselves when they are, let's say, for instance, you're drawing, you've got, you're like 11 years old, for instance, and you really love to express yourself and you're artistic in many ways, but you encounter somebody that had a bad day and they say, well, you'll never amount to nothing because, the world is full of people that, don't, artists can't aspire to be anything. Okay, that would be kind of like a message that you may hear at the age of 11 as an example, right? And what happens is it may be another person's distortion that gets projected onto you. And then what happens is, if you don't question that, or if you don't have a strong enough kind of sense of, okay, well, that's yours, because it's very difficult as a 11-year-old child, you begin to kind of internalize that, and it starts to become sort of real. And eventually you get to the age of 30 and you start to notice that you give up on the truth of who you are, because there's this internalized message that you may carry about yourself or about the world that is actually incorrect and is more to do with the other person than it is to do with you. So this is where the first potential exists within this current new moon in Scorpio, is that Uranus is pointing to and consistently moving through the Taurus archetype and creating consistent like fracturings and decentralizations and openings of where these outdated models of perspectives no longer represent the truth for you, okay? And Uranus energy can reflect itself as a kind of patterning of opening up, and you have these profound insights and realizations, and it shifts your energetic field, and you find yourself becoming more self-accepting, right? You're starting to notice, oh, okay, I'm actually reclaiming these stagnant energy parts of yourself. And that's what Taurus will correlate to, right? The energy is wound up in this constricted energy field of repression, and it wants to come through, but it can't, right? Because it keeps kind of being shamed down or pressed down. This is what will happen within societies anyway, as societies shift their perspective on what is okay and what is not okay, as an example. And that's also what's going on in the collective at the moment, right? We may be having profound liberations in one area where the liberation is taking place, but at the same time that liberation is taking place, there's also a reflection of shadow energy coming in and saying, well, now, this needs to be repressed because this is not okay anymore. So that's one of the things that is a sort of interesting to observe as civilizations go through changes in power and changes in external structures, right? This is more to do with Saturn in Pisces, which I'll talk about. But you will see that there will be kind of like a liberation of repressed energy and patterns of thinking, and it will appear like, yay, we're making progress, etc. But at the same time, where there has been wounding that has been taking place, there's also a kind of a necessary need to now reject what is the bad parts of that, right? Or perceived negative aspects of that. And so what happens is there becomes a new patterning of shaming, a new patterning of rejection, a new patterning of this is taboo and you can't talk about it kind of thing emerges, and then also becomes repressed. So it's like you can't actually escape the Taurian reflection of this was an act of self-preservation in the past. This was the values of how we live. But now, as we're liberating and we're freeing them, and it's like, yeah, you can talk about these things, there will become another patterning of shaming as well at the same time, right? So you'll see this kind of emerge within the collective as well. So for you individually, where Uranus is sitting, what is happening is that we are a collection of memories, of experiences that we carry with us. And a lot of the times, if you've had conflicts or you've had unresolved emotional tensions, it goes buried within the Taurean archetype. And Uranus is coming along and it's like, okay, kiddo, we got to bring this up to be healed. We've got to bring this up to be resolved in some way. And so that's really what this Mars-Uranus energy has been about, is kind of consistent pressure on that Mars, on that Uranus to bring up to the surface these eruptions. And up until this point in time, we haven't had necessary clarity. We've experienced more of a kind of shock, a psychic shock of a lot of complexity emerging into the consciousness, and now we're trying to process as things start to land, and so on. And the idea is not to react in that sense, because of course when there's a tremendous amount of shock, it's natural to in that displaced energy come back into the world with anger and kind of things, and that's what you will also see present in the collective energy field right now. With this Mars-Uranus opposition, right? The shock has taken place, things emerge, and then there's lots of anger that comes back into the world because of that experience of overwhelm and disempowerment that is tied in with the shock. And that shock is usually associated, and that intensity of that emotional charge is usually associated with the original impact rather than the shock itself that's happening now. Because that's the thing with Uranus, right? It has multiple timelines. Okay, so Taurus, preservation, suppression, emergence of that which has been repressed, okay? And you can see that the South Node ruler, so the South Node ruler is Venus, and Venus is also the planet that is associated with Taurus. And the South Node is currently in Libra at the moment. So of course, where these dynamics are emerging is within the relational field, right? It's in the field of relatability and relating and in relation with. So most of these eruptions will occur and on the surface will, in an unhealed way, will reflect itself as polarization, right? This polarization, this inability to be able to see the complexity that is present, that is surrounding the situation. And that will create polarization. And in many ways, the polarization is necessary not because it's good, but because polarization will create the need for energy to now need to be processed through, right? I'm not saying polarization is good in the sense that, yeah, I mean it in the sense that it naturally, if you take two energies that need to take up space that are unresolved, they have to move apart like this in order to understand and come to deep insight and reflection and healing internally in order for them to come back together again. So that is also what you will see in the collective at the moment, and probably internally within yourselves. When you've got an emotional charge that is unresolved, it's really difficult for that emotional charge to be present in the same space that triggers it, or the same space that is also holding an emotional charge, because it's too dense, right? You need that kind of splitting apart and separation. Okay, so that's that, right? Let's move over to Scorpio, and I'm going to try to do the same here with the Scorpio archetype, right? So the Scorpio archetype reflects the intrinsic awareness, okay, that at any moment in time, something can die, okay? It is the law of impermanence. And that acute psychic sensitivity to the natural law of life and death, right? This interplay between at any moment something can lose its life, right? And this is a sort of cycle of life and death that we as human beings experience. Things end, but also things regenerate, and things are also sacred. That's what Scorpio teaches us in terms of wisdom. It is when we are born into this world, right? When an organism comes into this world, it is simultaneously now bound to the duality of the ending of its cycle. So birth in and of itself reflects a death, right? Death will naturally reflect birth. And so Scorpio, in its wisdom, is psychically aware of this interconnection. So what I so what I so what you are experiencing when we experience planets move through Scorpio is this very heightened sense of where the vulnerability lies. Okay, it's kind of like it's deeply buried in the subtle landscape of the Scorpio archetype. There is that preservation. It's like, okay, we need to be alert. We need to be awake. We need to be aware, because we live in a world where there's danger, there are things that can happen, but it is also that subtle awareness that we are awake to our instincts, right? We're awake to our instincts. That capacity to be awake to our instincts also is part of the Scorpio archetype. Now, for us as human beings, when we go through our lives, we're going to form attachments to people, to things, to experiences. And when we form these attachments, we are at the same time setting up betrayal, loss, and abandonment. It can, the loss of the attachment can come through a betrayal. The loss of attachment can come through the actual loss of the life itself, right? Whether it be a natural. The process of betrayal, abandonment, right? Abandonment itself, right? The process of abandoning and moving away, what once was fixated and merged with, right, can also then be removed in that sense. So Scorpio holds that psychic awareness of that deep desire to merge with something, to understand it, but it also reflects the process at the same time of this separation mechanism. So as I said, this subtlety of the Scorpio vulnerability at the end then presents what comes from that place is this hyper awareness. And in our consciousness, we will, and in our human psychology, because we know that betrayal can take place, because we know that abandonment can take place, and we know that that loss is inevitable, right? We can create protection mechanisms, right? The identification with defensive processes. So when we traverse through the underworld of the Scorpio archetype, there is a intense emotional recognition of where this vulnerability has been violated. And also the sensitivity to not wanting it to be violated, and the preemptive armoring of shutting it down, cutting it off, not opening up, and essentially being kind of like chaste, right? So just your the desire for attachment, but the awareness of what attachment brings, and so therefore the refractiveness. This I'm bound by the absence of emotional attachment into the process, as an act of preserving that vulnerability, right? And Scorpio Taurus axis is in opposition to each other. So there's always that dialectic between vulnerability and preservation, vulnerability and preservation. So if you look at this opposition between Mars and Uranus at the moment, what is emerging within our collective is subtle states of energetic awareness where we can begin to examine and expose where we have experienced up until this point in time these violations of this vulnerability, these abuses that exist when power is, when there is a need for power, when there's been an overstepping and a desecration of the sacredness of innocence. Like if you think about it, right? Dignity is an act of respecting the sacredness in you by giving that to the other person. But when there is so much trauma, when there is so much emotional frozenness that has occurred, that capacity to feel that emotional sensitivity is so shut down that there is emptiness there. And that's where you can see acts of sociopathy and psychopathy, right? These emotional states are where there is a complete absence of that emotional vulnerability, but also at the same time, the recognition that that vulnerability exists. It's like this weird paradox, because you know that you can either be hunted or you are being, or you hunt. That's what happens in Scorpio processes. Because of that vulnerability dynamic, there's a dialectic that takes place between, well, if I'm being hunted, I don't want to be hunted because then I'm vulnerable. And so therefore I've got to switch it around and I want to be the hunter. Okay. And this is what emerges and reflects itself within the consciousness. So if you look at what is happening in the world right now and you reflect on these deep mechanics that are possessing our consciousness at this point in time, you will see that there is this underlying sense of the hunted and those that are being hunted and those that are hunting. And both emerge out of this mechanism of vulnerability. Now, if you bring it back to yourself, and you think about what I was talking about earlier in this video when I talked about these patterns of disempowerment that possess us, right? The ghosts of our past experiences hold our emotional energy in contempt and purgatory, and we can't allow for this vitality to move through us because it is so wound deeply within this repressive, self-preservating act that the ego presents, because the world is such a threatening place, right? So here we have this opportunity to begin to look at these emotional emergences, right? So as I said, turbulence ahead. So what comes into the field is so much emotion, anger, frustration, pain, etc. This is an opportunity to withdraw and to reflect on where this original and how these emotions are playing out for you. Do you feel the threat of being hunted? Right? Where were the experiences of that loss of agency taken away, right? Where was this vulnerability as a child growing up, right? Of the world growing up and being this vulnerable, but then interfacing with a place that can desecrate that. And so we shut down, we close down, we recede, right? We don't allow for this vitality to move through. And quite frankly, it's incredibly difficult to hold that space 24/7 if there is a strong association of focus with the nature of the world right now, because the collective is having this kind of flashlight on top of these dynamics that plague our capacity for humanity, plague our capacity for richness and peace in one way. And I don't mean peace in a trivial sense of like this idealistic, oh, like let's just be friends. It's not possible in that way, but human dignity. And this energy has the potential to awaken our capacity to heal these deeply wounded parts within ourselves that we carry with us, that possess our capacity to feel our experiences alive and real, because there is this act of needing to retaliate and attack in some way. Now, if we look at the Pisces archetype and we kind of step into okay, if we look at this Pisces archetype, we sort of step into the Saturn trining Neptune, or pardon me, not Saturn trining Neptune, that's not possible because Saturn and Neptune in the same sign. I mean, the Sun, Moon, and Scorpio trining this Neptune, right? It's got, as I said before in the Saturn video, Saturn direct video, and the turbulence ahead, part of the healing journey that we are about to embark on, right? This is an overall arc. It's not something that just happens in a day. It's like there's an emotional arc that happens, that takes place, and the potential for us to grow over here is to begin to work through the distortions in our energetic field and our emotional field, and to address these unresolved patterns. And the power and the potential lies in the individual. I don't know or think that we are at a larger scale capable of this. I think what will emerge in the collective as a way to try to respond to the energies at the moment is that there will be more progressive polarizations between the perpetrator and the victim. okay? And then the saviors that will want to come through this process, right? That's what happens in Pisces energies, is that there's a part in the Pisces energy that is so pure and innocent, that is divine source, that if it was, it does not have the capacity to withstand the destruction of a tsunami wave. So when something like a tsunami wave comes at something that is innocent, the natural perspective is to escape it, to run away from it, right? And the identification with that destruction and that distortion becomes the victim, right? Sorry, not becomes the victim, but becomes a perpetrator. So what happens in our collective consciousness when we run Piscean stories is that there's always going to be a possession between the energies of absolute purification or purity and innocence and something that cannot be disturbed, and this energy that represents absolute chaos. And those two things, they this kind of love and light process, right? It has to escape it. It cannot be consumed by it because it cannot take it on. And we will experience that. As Saturn moves through Pisces, we will experience and see how these stories possess our collective consciousness and how they will be embodied in our physical world. And the wisdom here is to not get consumed by or brought into the possession of the ways that our collective wounds are bleeding out at this point in time, right? There's a tremendous amount of energy that is emerging into the collective right now of where we are wounded. And we get to see this. And that's what Saturn in Pisces is doing. It's like opening up this field of where this destruction is taking place. And that's what happens when the end of a civilization or the end of a cultural patterning exists, or where Pisces reflects the completion or closure of something. And during change of completion, during change of closure, right, there is the seams of what holds things together starts to diffuse, right? The patterning and the energy starts to fade away. And as it fades away, what emerges is all of the things that are held within the collective consciousness. And so what you're seeing right now is energy that has been dormant within our collective, that has been unhealed, that has been unresolved, where violations of abuse of power, etc., have been laying there. And Uranus, Mars came along and said, okay, kiddo, it's time for us to shake it up, right? And we've got to process through this. We've got to move through this. And for you as a person connecting to the collective, part of the story is a part of you, right? You carry that within yourself and your own individual experiences of where these wounds and these loss of innocence have taken place. And then we have our association to the collective, right? That's just a broader scope of what is internally happening for us. So this new moon energy is speaking to the potential and the power of embodying, so having this Mars energy of embodying and splitting apart the rigidity and the walls that have been put up as a way to preserve the threats of danger, right? To start to allow the opening of these wounds to occur, and for us to naturally go through the process of the messiness and the triage that will come from this, and the shock, the emotional shock that is going to be present with us. And that's another video that I want to do, by the way, just so you know. I want to really talk about the Aquarius signature and the two ways that psychic shock emerges in our collective, right? We disassociate into patterns of innocence, and this is for the big people to deal with, or the complete shutting down of our emotional capacities and the rigidity that then emerges into, again, this absent, lifeless, cold way of responding to life, right? The loss of innocence. And that is what is also present here, right? We're working through our patterns of dissociation around these experiences of deep violations of loss, deep violations of agency. And this is an opportunity to split apart and to internally reflect on where these layerings exist within us, and to start to over the next 6 months, just, split it apart and question them and say to them, is this still true for me right now? That's where we can have that agency, and to begin to embody new insights that will be flowing through our consciousness at this point in time. and coming in and allowing us to feel, as I said, where these ghosts of the past possess your emotional field and they hold you back, and you're stuck in that space. You want to move through that. And again, as I said, you move through that by questioning and seeing where these parts of shame and parts of unresolved emotions and tensions exist, and take action in them. Moving it in the direction of starting to stir the pot is better than nothing. Okay, so that's kind of the space that I'm sort of moving towards at this point in time. So I really hope that this has given you something to think about and to reflect on, to thought. There is no specific kind of definedness. It's more of an open dialogue that invites us to reflect on themes that are present in the collective, but also within ourselves at this point in time. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to me. As always, if you feel that this video has given you something of quality and value, tell the algorithm, press the like button, write in the comment section how this new moon is emerging for you within your consciousness. Let me know. I like to read the comments. Share this video with anybody that you feel would benefit from this process. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, I encourage you to do that. And if you're feeling sharing and giving in some way, you can always use the thanks button just below the title of this video as well to share your appreciation for what I've been talking about today. All right, guys, thanks very much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.